Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our guests, Brooks Roche and Andrew Halliday. We're here to talk to us today, and Robert Henderson is replacing Robert Mitchell today. We have Sydney McEwen in for James Allward. Ernie Hudson isn't able to be with us today, and I'd like to welcome Lynn Lund as our officially new member, our newest member to the committee. And welcome to Michelle Beaton and Ola Hammerland as well. And I might, hi Heath, say hi to you too, you're the only one I didn't mention. Could I get a motion to adopt the agenda? Heath McDonald, thank you very much. And as I mentioned, we have Brooks Roche here today, who is with, he's a member of the Premier's Youth Council, formerly known as the Youth Futures Council, and Andrew Halliday, Senior Policy Officer for Executive Council, joining us today to talk to us a little bit about what it is that you're working on and where you're going, and anything else any other information that you were going to give us today. So would it be your preference that we hold questions till the end?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So, Madam Chair, I have some introductory statements to make, and then Brooks has a slideshow presentation to provide, and then I think at that point, if there was questions or comments, we're actually looking forward to getting some feedback from this committee around the issue, so we're hoping to have that at the end. So.
Okay. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, members of the Standing Committee, we wish to thank all of you for the invitation to present here today. This is Brooks's first presentation to a Legislative Standing Committee, but we're both pleased to be here and share with you our youth engagement efforts, and most importantly, to share our vision for the future going forward and to seek your input around youth engagement. We'd like to acknowledge MLA Beaton, for whom this invitation originated, and also the support of the membership of this Standing Committee in bringing the invitation forward. Our greatest interest this afternoon is to hear input from the members of this committee as we seek ways to improve upon youth engagement here in PEI. My name is Andrew Halliday, and I work with the Executive Council Office, and one of my roles is to provide leadership and support to government's youth engagement efforts. I'd like to also introduce our Youth Engagement Officer seated beside me here, Mr. Brooks Roche from Montague. Brooks will be leading our PowerPoint presentation, but I have a few opening comments to begin. Madam Chair, this new administration's mandate is focused on people. The Premier is committed to renewal, especially when it comes to engaging our youth, and one of the most important commitments made by the Premier was to listen. Some significant structural reforms have occurred within the youth file recently. This council, which is one of the main mechanisms supporting dialogue between government and youth, is now housed within Executive Council. We believe that this positioning will improve engagement and best position our council to succeed in working collaboratively across all of government. Youth engagement work is already occurring as we are putting in place this structure that will best allow our youth to be heard and succeed. Brooks is doing excellent work, and he has some unique experience from a federal context that I'm sure he will share with you. There is a strong vision, anchored by pillars, and the intention is to build upon these with an envisioned engagement cycle for all youth. I want to also acknowledge the good work that was done by the previous government in establishing a signature youth event and the associated structure. This is a solid foundation that we are looking to strengthen and improve upon, working collaboratively across the House and across the province for the betterment of PEI and our younger generations. I believe it's also important to note that it is not our desire or intention to get into prejudging the Council and specifically the ideas and priorities of members. We look forward to seeing the unique perspectives which new members will bring forward in their roles in the month ahead. Now I'll turn it over to Brooks for the slideshow presentation.
Okay, so thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Madam Chair, and to the committee for having us here today. As mentioned, my name is Brooks Roche, and I'd like to begin by just giving you a bit of background information on what's brought me here today from a long-standing perspective. So a bit about myself. I'm very passionate about this issue, about youth engagement, and personally, I hail from Montague. I hold an undergraduate degree in architecture from Dalhousie University. I'm currently pursuing a Master of Business Administration, specializing in global leadership at UPEI. And beyond this, I would say that a lot of the work that I've done in my life to date revolves around, as a community member, as a student, as an athlete, as someone with a chronic illness. A lot of the work that I do has to do with both changing systems that are in place and advocating for change that I see as important, but as well providing people that may not have a voice or who have traditionally been silent with the means to join the conversation as well. So that being said, I was thrilled in 2018 to join what was then entitled the Youth Futures Council, giving me an opportunity to contribute and represent the voices of young people in PEI. And I guess I did an okay job because I was then honored last year by being appointed to the Prime Minister's Youth Council and representing the voices of youth across the country. So further to this, and with these experiences in tow, I'm of course very excited to be given this file and given a bit of leeway to do what I can with the youth file on Prince Edward Island. So my title as Youth Engagement Officer with Executive Council Office means that I'm working to reestablish, coordinate, and eventually chair what is now the Premier's Youth Council. So today I'm going to walk you through a few things. First of all, here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. And of course, yes, hello, a bit belated. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm going to walk you through the mandate, the composition, the vision, and then a few of the underlying principles that have guided and will continue to guide this work that I'm doing. And then we will, as said, conclude with a question period. So to begin, these 6 points really comprise the Youth Council's mandate. First and foremost is providing nonpartisan input and advice on issues that affect the lives of young islanders. Secondly, advising the government on systems, strategies, programs, policies that have to do with enhancing the lives of young islanders. So in this sense, this has to do with both developing and improving these systems that are in place. Third, this has to do with bringing in other voices of young people in the island. So this is about leading community engagement activities to, again, enhance the scope of the voices that we're listening to. Well, the fourth point up there is to act as a sounding board during preliminary policy development. What I mean by this is this mechanism is in place partly for departments to be able to come in and provide a youth lens where one might not otherwise be applied. Again, looking at the fifth point, bringing in other voices. So this has to do with engaging youth in processes such as consultations and frameworks that need input from youth, and using this mechanism to get a wider image of what's going on in Prince Edward Island. And final point up there is to assist in youth retention strategies, which is a long-standing priority of the government. So the question now, how is this council actually composed? Well, currently there are 5 members, of which I'm one. These members were appointed in October 2018. And as you may have seen, I hope you all have, there's a news release that came out last week. Applications are now being accepted for the next wave of members. And I'd like to take this opportunity to shamelessly plug, please promote as you can. Would love to get as diverse representation as possible from all districts and regions and demographics of the island. So this is done through Engage PEI, and really the intent, once these new members are appointed at the end of the month, what we'll have is a council of between 12 and 15 members, and this is going to be composed really in as best a possible reflection of the dynamism, the diversity, and the impact that young islanders can have in whatever way is best pulled from those who apply, which again, we're hoping to get as diverse a possible pool to develop the best possible council. I'd like to now touch on the vision for the future, and this through the lens of the council. So really there are 4 points here. We want to build upon the past successes. As Andrew mentioned, there was certainly great work done by previous administration on this file, and it's important to build on top of that. Fundamentally, this is about delivering what's best for young people on PEI. So that is a foundational principle of what we want to achieve. As well, with the restructuring that's taken place, a major advantage to this new arrangement is allowing youth to impact more directly and more broadly governmental affairs. So by positioning within Executive Council, it's more easy for youth who wish to address a priority item to get in touch with that relevant department. And this will hopefully develop a culture of youth integration across departments. And finally, what we want to do is engage. This is a term that came out of the event Y Day in 2016, and it's intergenerational collaboration. And this is really key because this is not about dealing with youth in a silo or in a vacuum. This is about engaging youth as a member of a broader spectrum of society. So engaging with all islanders certainly does mean engaging with youth. Another way of looking at this is through these three pillars, which have kind of been identified through some research into the matter. And what we're looking at here, first of all, policy integration. What this means essentially is a mechanism like the Council and its inward-facing methods. So this is about providing youth input directly to government on a specific matter. What we then have is youth leadership, and this is more the outward-facing matter or form of operation of the Council. So this is engaging outward and engaging leading activities in the community and providing that kind of connectivity between the general population of young islanders and those who have been appointed to the Council. And finally, what we have is community engagement. And this is a bit more broad. It stretches beyond the boundaries of what the other two talk about. And this is really about developing a more sustainable strategy. It's about making the general conversation of young islanders a more engaged one. This has to do, an example of this is my intention in the coming months to interact with high school student councils across the province, for example. So developing this tradition or this custom where it's not shocking for a young person to say, what I see isn't working, and I'm going to get in touch with someone who can make a change. This can also be viewed as a cycle, and this is really what gets more into an action-based plan. So what we can see here, for example, is a signature event wherein a wide range of young islanders can come together, propose actionable solutions, of course, after identifying problems, but the key is they propose a fix. They propose a plan of action. These results are then taken, interpreted, and communicated by a mechanism like the Premier's Youth Council, but also all across government. And then, interestingly enough, this is fed back into, it becomes a cyclical relationship because this discussion normalizes, as mentioned earlier. So what really happens here is a change in the narrative. And as you can see, if all of these come to fruition, the entire cycle becomes stronger. And that is really what we contend is the result of investing in youth engagement in this matter. So in conclusion, Madam Chair, I would like to thank you again for the invitation and just really highlight that the reason that we're here today is to siphon a little bit of feedback from this committee on what the priorities are and what constructive and forward-thinking methods we can implement to ensure that this works as well as it possibly can. So once again, I say thank you very much, and I look forward to the feedback.
Thank you. Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Brooks. Thank you, Andrew. Being on the Prime Minister's Council, so Youth Futures Council and the Prime Minister's Council, what have positively learned from the Prime Minister's Council that you can bring forward to, say, the new Premier's Youth Council?
Well, great question, first of all. I think that a lot of what took place was kind of, you did quite a jurisdictional scan of what were the differences between the operating styles of what was the Youth Futures Council and, for example, Prime Minister's Youth Council or councils in other jurisdictions. And I think a few highlights were just some mechanisms that provided members with a little bit more transparency, because a key here is to provide members with the capacity to show the work that they were doing, or the priorities that they had identified. Further to that, I would say the capacity to a little more directly engage with relevant departments, where obviously if you develop a council like this, they will identify more individual priorities. And to pursue those more effectively, it's important to structure it in a manner that provides easy access. And I think by restructuring within Executive Council, that box has been checked quite effectively. But beyond that, it's really, I think, a takeaway from looking at other jurisdictions is that it's an iterative process, and it has to do with the actual council, once it's been formed, to come together to identify priorities, to set our own schedule, our mandate, and to pursue it organically, because that's a reflection of young people on the island.
Sydney?
Thanks, Chair. And thank you. I appreciate your earlier comments too about not prejudging what this council could do, because oftentimes that's a problem where we end up telling committees or telling, say, Youth Futures Council to say, this should be what you're doing, when no, let's let them do what they want to do, figure it out. The former Youth Futures Council, and I was lucky to go to the Y Days and participate and see the things that were going on, and the feedback that I would get from it is, this is fantastic, it's amazing the resources being put towards this. And it's not that we shouldn't be listening to it, but the strong feedback I got was that it's one thing to listen and to take the concerns, but it's another thing to be actually made part of the decision-making process. Now, you alluded to, you think it's a good thing that this is now within the Executive Council, this group, but is there anything you could suggest to us, or perhaps can suggest to the Premier, is it's not just about listening to what your recommendations are going to be, or what comes out of Y Day, or whatever the new council does, but it's how do we get young people actually part of the decision-making teams that are there. You know, for example, internet comes up every Y Day, and you know, how we need that, and we need to improve. I'm out home, I have to move to Charlottetown for my school, this kind of thing. But how do we get someone on the proper committee or in the proper group that's part of that decision-making process that stands up and says, no, actually, this has to be a priority today. So, you know, a heavy question, but that's my big takeaway from the previous Youth Futures Council, and one I don't want to see continue on with the future one. Do you have any thoughts with that, just with your experience on it?
So with my experience through the Prime Minister's Youth Council, I actually had the chance to co-write a letter that was talking about, this was leading up to the federal election in October, and what we identified was a strategy that there was a long-term youth engagement strategy for the country. And a big piece of what we identified was that the issue does expand at a certain point beyond government scope, and what we advocated for was certainly in the public sector and private sector and nonprofit and beyond, to integrate youth onto decision-making bodies, onto boards, etc., and having that be a total scalar development where obviously in a perfect world we can contend that youth will have an equal opportunity to contribute to these decisions. That's a little bit of a roundabout way of saying, I think as chair of the council, what I can do is certainly identify this as a priority and work with fellow members to say what action can be taken. I would just hesitate to make a direct claim right now.
No.
Certainly a priority, and I totally empathize with that point of view.
Just one more comment, Chair. Thank you, and push for that. I mean, we joke that one of the former Youth Futures Councils is working with the Premier in a fairly significant role right now. It's a positive thing, but I think that's the kind of thing that we need to do is across all government is at those senior levels be looking, to the graduates of the Youth Future Council kind of thing, put them in positions where they can affect change, they can bring that stuff, and I would just encourage you to keep pushing that, as one of the pillars of your group is to say, don't just listen, take us and involve us in the process. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Andrew and Brooke, for coming in today to talk about this. It's been really interesting. One comment that Andrew made was on the commitment to listen, and I appreciate that. I'm curious if the previous members of the Premier's Youth Council have been consulted on their experience within the council to give some feedback on how it could be better.
If I may, one of the first priorities that I identified when I took the position was to develop a survey that has been sent out to all former and current members of the council, which developed, it was really 6 kind of key areas of how well equipped were you, what specific changes would you want to see in specific operations of the council, what structure could change to best give you this capability. And we did actually get pretty good feedback on that, and it's certainly been considered in redeveloping the terms of reference, for example. Yeah.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. That's fantastic. I'm really happy to hear that. It's a great answer. I'm also wondering, in the last couple of years, other than Y Day, were there any other specific initiatives that were undertaken by the council?
The council.
The Premier's Youth Council.
I can speak as far as 2018. Before that, as I wasn't a member, I can't be 100% sure, but I do know that they participated and facilitated to some extent some outreach sessions, which I think is, again, Y Day is fantastic, but once a year may not be enough to foster that conversation.
Completely agree.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I completely agree with you. It's exactly where I was going with that. Once a year is definitely not enough to really build that sort of rapport or foster those conversations. And I was wondering if the council has any ideas on how they will track and measure the success of the different initiatives.
Good point. I would say once the council has been, new members have been appointed and we've met in person and identified some priority items, at that point, then it would be more, I'd be more able to say how we would plan on measuring that. But certainly it's being considered moving forward.
And if I may, Chair, just on the point of evaluation, I think that was something that was identified to Brooks's earlier point around the survey with the outgoing members. I think it's important for us as we move to evidence-based decision making to be able to have that evaluation portion to understand what is being undertaken and whether or not we're meeting the goals and the indicators that we set out through the council and the priorities. So,
I completely agree. Thank you. I'm
Lynn?
good, Chair.
Any other questions? I meant to say when you first came in, it's a breath of fresh air to have another youth in the room with me. There was something that you had said that stuck with me. So whenever you talk about, there was a point on one of your earlier slides to engage intergenerational collaboration across PEI and to not have it as quite so much as a silo, which there's so many things that can be said for, so I think that's such a great point. What has been your experience? I know we often hear of the token youth on the committee, or do you feel that we've moved beyond that yet? Is that a tough question?
That is quite a tough question.
Yeah. I guess sorry, I'll let you.
It's hard to say. I've certainly seen situations where it is beyond that, where it's a young person that has entirely earned a spot on a decision-making board or committee. And I think as a member of, for example, the Prime Minister's Youth Council, I'm always very impressed at the way that it's composed and the way that members are selected on very, very merit-based, it's a very meritocratic system. But again, when it comes to across the board, I don't know if I have a straight answer on if we're there yet. I think, again, there's always progress that can be made. But the goal is, as mentioned in that slide, long-term to get to that point where we're simply recognizing a collection of individuals that can contribute to the best decision possible, not to do with what box do they check on a given checklist.
Yeah, right. Thank you for that. And having had the opportunity to do this on the federal level, did you have the opportunity to kind of see what the other provinces were doing in terms of youth engagement?
To a certain extent, yes. I had done some research and some discussion with members from across the country. But the Prime Minister's Youth Council isn't done province and territory representative style. So certainly, for example, we don't have a member from Saskatchewan. So I didn't have quite an in on perhaps the system they may use. And that being said, not all provinces do have this mechanism. So we do have an advantage in that the infrastructure is already there. I suppose to your question, as much as possible, we considered what other jurisdictions have done and tried to pull some best practices from there.
Okay. Lynn? Oh, sorry, Heath?
Sorry. You mentioned, Brooks, about going into the high schools or whatever. What kind of relationship, and I remember, and I read the report on the Y days just before it came up, so there's actually some extremely good information on those in that report. It relates basically very well to what's happening in PEI today, so the youth were actually ahead as far as I think of some of the decisions that have to be made. But what's your relationship with, like, that day, if I remember correctly, there was a lot of post-secondary students or beyond at those Y days. How do you think, or how will you get effect to those grade 11, 12 students or 10 to the Y day events? Does there need to be some collaboration between the Department of Education and your organization to make sure that we get a good representation, or is that an option for you maybe?
Certainly an option, yeah. I've been in touch with some individuals that are promoting the application process right now through basically grades 10 to 12 or age 16 plus secondary students right now. So that network is in place and can be used in the future, but could definitely be enhanced, because I agree it's important, it's hard to expect people to be engaged when they're able to vote if they've never been engaged beforehand. So if we can, push it to a little bit earlier to get people thinking about actually making their voice heard and participating in the democratic process, then all the better.
Okay, I'm fine, thank you.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Just one final question that occurred to me based on the Chair's question, actually, about the tokenism that we tend to see when youth are brought on board. We don't always fully engage them, and I'm just wondering, based on your experience, if you have any feedback on how we can more effectively have a youth-led and driven council.
Led and driven.
Youth-led and driven is the sort of mandate.
Yes, yeah.
And that can often be a tokenism expression where you have a framework that's handed to you that you are expected to work with, and I'm just wondering if you have any advice or recommendations that would genuinely make the council more youth-led and driven.
One that's in place is that myself, I will be chairing the council, which is a bit of a change in the structure. So to have it is literally youth-led in that sense. But again, I think it's about allowing that sort of co-design to occur within the council, rather than being handed a list of priorities, to be able to sit down and say, let's examine the situation. Because I think a challenge that has arisen with these types of mechanisms, certainly in other provinces, is that it becomes a group sits down and they're presented to, and that becomes, well, task complete, instead of allowing youth to identify the issues that matter most to them and impact them most.
Thank you. Any other questions? As I was listening to you speak, I was reminded of, and it's always kind of at the front of my brain, so it's not hard to be reminded of this, but some of us in our caucus had the opportunity to meet with a youth engagement officer. I think that was her title, I believe she was from Ottawa, and I was fascinated to hear that, based on their research, that technically people between the ages of 15 and 24 should not be sitting in classrooms. They should indeed be solving the world's problems, due specifically to just the very nature of their brain and the plasticity in their brain at that point in time of development. And so it's, that's why I bring forth this notion of the tokenism, because we know that's very real. I was just at an event the other day where it was basically a bunch of, and now I'm going to call myself an old fogey, but a bunch of older fogies, and there was one youth in the room, and so I was thrilled to have them there. But it dawned on me, it was an event that I was hosting, and there was there was a small group of people there, and there was one youth, and so I was very consciously trying to draw him into the conversation and hear what he had to say, and it dawned on me that there were people in the room who were arguing, asking questions about what motivates youth and how do you engage youth. So there's a particular conversation around harness racing, and whenever he went to speak, people were kind of trying to say what their thought, why it wouldn't work or why it was hard or whatever. And I think we do that based on trying to remember when we were youth and what was relevant to us, but that has very much changed. And so a council like this is so important, and my hope is that, and I'm not 100% sure on the reporting structure, like you report, I'm assuming, directly to the Premier on different things.
If I may, yeah, so with the restructuring, and Andrew can perhaps on the policy side speak a bit more to this, but by being an executive council, it does shorten the length of communication that has to happen to senior leadership.
Well, the terms of reference do allow for an accountability framework and reporting structure where there will be a report that's brought forward up to the minister responsible, who would be the Premier. So there is a reporting structure set up in place.
And is that shared with the Legislative Assembly, or is that?
I would have to check. I'm not sure if that's something that is, it's not a legislative requirement to be tabled, but I certainly would not see why the Premier would want to share that, perhaps with the House, even if it's out of session or something. But I'll check on that, and I can get back to you and
that
you and the
would be
committee
great.
clerk.
I just think it's really important that, because I know our numbers of youth employed within the civil service and our number of youth are really low, and that's damaging and concerning for so many reasons and on so many levels. So I would be very eager to kind of to follow your work and see what you're finding and where the loopholes are and where the gaps are, because if those aren't identified and clearly shared with the Legislative Assembly and in the work that we do, we're lacking that voice by not, I mean, we do our own consultations and things like that, but it would be really neat to have that voice represented as well. So, so I appreciate that. Any other questions? Is there anything else that, I know you were kind of looking for some direction, is there anything from us, like do you have any, is there anything specific that you're looking for?
Perhaps not specifically, but because it is such a dynamic process and still in its nascent stages, and obviously once we appoint members it'll morph a little bit. But I again would just encourage any members of the Legislative Assembly to please contact me with any information, suggestions, commentary that you may have. I welcome it.
Okay. And for us to share, to kind of plug the Engage PEI application process. Okay.
Yeah, it's available on the website, so if you go to the website link, there's an availability to apply directly through the website. And yeah, just I think from my perspective, I'm excited to see what the council has to do as it gets up to speed here, and I think perhaps some patience from all sides of the house as the council kind of gets itself underway and kind of feels its feet, because it's a new process, it's a new structure where it's housed within executive council, and I think that it's going to take a little bit of time to maybe to shake it down, but once it gets started and functioning, I think the strength of that structure is really going to kind of start to come through, and I think we'll see some excellent work out of Brooks and his team once they're all put in place. So.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, and very much appreciated. A few times you had said bringing voices to the table. I don't remember exactly I said about bringing voices to the table that might not naturally get there. So I appreciated that too. Any other last comments? Ola?
Just wondering how often you plan to meet once you have established?
So good question. Within the terms of reference, we identified approximately monthly meetings, obviously subject to members' schedules. The way that it has operated as a former, or as a member as of 2018, generally it was meetings through the year with a bit of a summer break. And that was typically followed with a signature event in the fall. So again, that's the way it has worked. It may shift depending on new members, but trying to go for pseudo-monthly meetings.
Well, the structure of the meeting as well, Oli, we're hoping to leverage some technology, not to make everything so dependent upon Charlottetown, to try and increase engagement across the province. So there is some technological support that can be put in place to have some virtual meetings and stuff like that. And I think Brooks' ongoing efforts to reach out into the communities as opposed to bringing the communities to us, I think is also going to pay some great dividends, specifically with the high school councils. They're going to be in place for the upcoming school year here in the next probably 6 or 7 weeks. So to get Brooks in front of them before the school year completes, so then come September, he's a known quantity with the school councils, and we can kind of leverage those networks in the communities themselves, and then look to use virtual technology to kind of help with the burden of having a Charlottetown-centric council. So, and there was some work that took place under the former iteration of the council towards this, so they did lay a bit of framework for us too, which is good.
So I can speak to that. So I was studying in Halifax while serving in the council, and was always able to join in virtually. And I think the key idea is no one should be precluded from participating because of whatever circumstance they're in.
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting for us as legislators to keep an eye on your work and to even see your processes, because we have a lot to learn from youth in terms of how do you reach that audience and how do you do that. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of see this unfold and to watch how you do things. We may learn, well, not may, we will learn from your way of doing, I would imagine. So yeah, we're all good, Julie. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in. Very informative and nice to meet you finally. So I guess that will end this portion of the meeting. Thank you. Oh, I forgot to say. Welcome back, everyone. Next on our agenda is a review of correspondence and scheduling. Just a few notes here. So in keeping with some of our recent decisions, we have sent out a letter to the Chief Electoral Officer, Tim Garrity, who had requested to come in and talk to us about elections PEI and some of the challenges and opportunities they face and that we face in implementing school board elections and potentially tying those to provincial or municipal elections. We've asked for the Education Minister to come in to talk to us a little bit about the kindergarten curriculum review and the proposed universal pre-K program. The Economic Growth Minister to talk a little bit about internet services and more specifics on the plan and timelines. Also, we do have Skills PEI coming in to talk about skilled labor shortages and some of the programs and services that they are offering to help deal with that, both new and existing programs. And several of the recipients have accepted these invitations and will be coming in throughout March. We have also sent information requests to provincial parks authorities regarding the allocation of the new funding and wondering a little more specifics on how they plan on spending that. As well, we've asked the Education Minister, or we're asking the Education Minister to come in and talk to us about updates to the Post-Secondary Institution Sexual Violence Policies Act, specifically related to the regulations, to see where they are there. So we have meetings every week until the House sits, up until March 31st. And so on March 17th, we'll have a briefing from Tim Garrity from Elections PEI. Joining him will be Stephanie Thorpe, the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, and Paul Allen, Manager of Election Operations and Communications. On March 24th, we will be hearing from Karen Stanley, who is the Acting Director of Skills PEI, possibly some other presenters, but we're not sure yet. And on March 31st, PEI Home and School Federation, the representatives Corey Thomas, who's the president, Haley Zabo, the secretary, and Andrea Richard, regional director for Charlottetown Rural, will be coming in to talk about reestablishing elected school boards. And then potentially into April, May, having potentially one or two more in-camera meetings to discuss the final report. So that is that. Did I get
that
everything?
covers it all.
All right, okay.
Good job.
Good. Thanks, Sydney. New business. Does anybody have any new business? I might have jumped a little bit. I'm looking at, so last meeting we identified three, not new priorities, but our next three priorities. And they were, first, the kindergarten curriculum review and government's plans for free universal pre-kindergarten program. So we've sent out an invitation to the minister and no reply yet. Second was rural internet access, update on progress, involvement of local firms, and we've also reached out to the minister and are still waiting a reply. And the third is on social promotion, benefits and drawbacks.
Can I ask a question
Yes.
about that? For social promotion, it was identified as sort of the number 3 of the upcoming priorities the last time we discussed this, but there wasn't a specific action attached to it in terms of we will invite these people to come in or we will write to these people. Mm-hmm. It was identified as a priority without a specific task attached to it. So I wanted to ask the committee today if they had suggestions as to how they'd like to pursue that specific priority when we get to it.
Does anybody have any suggestions, Lynn?
Chair, can I ask for some clarification around social promotion?
Sure. So social promotion is like kind of an explanation of what it is and why we've prioritized it.
Social promotion as a concept.
What's that?
It seems we may not be entirely clear on what the topic is that we're discussing.
So social promotion has to do with the decision whether to hold a child back in a grade or to pass them. From what I understand, I'm actually hearing from so many parents about this, and they're advocating really hard to hold their child back for really legit reasons, the ones who have contacted me, and it's just not an option. And so earlier in the meetings when we had originally identified it, we were talking about what are kind of the benefits to holding children back, what are some potential drawbacks to that, and going a step farther here out on a limb, but what is the process to decide, and is there ever a time that, according to whoever we invite in, I would like to know what their thoughts are on if there's ever, like, what would constitute a good reason to hold a child back. Does that
Absolutely.
kind of explain?
Thank you.
Yeah. Especially given literacy rates and pushing kids through and falling through the cracks, it's very, it's very important.
So when you say it's not an option as far as the school is concerned?
So, right, so what the process is, you know, you talk to your school principal, and you talk to the principal, and then there's a meeting that would be involved. But I've been hearing from people at the principal level of them kind of being like, it's probably not going to happen, but we can set up the meeting. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff around that.
Is that something that the Chair?
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Is that something that we should have the minister give us an update on the process around, or is that something that you would like to hear from the principals on? What would you recommend? Is it a school level discussion that we need to be having, or a school board level discussion, or would
That is a phenomenal question. I would be curious, I have my own thoughts on that, but I would be curious to hear what the committee thinks about that, whether it's at the school level we want to be hearing from the experts on, or if it's more at the systemic level that we would like to hear.
Thoughts, committee?
Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. And just further to Lynn's point, we had a discussion about this last time as well, and it was Carla and I believe Rob Mitchell had also said that he was hearing from constituents, and I hadn't been, but once they kind of said that it was an issue for them, we basically said, yes, let's go forward, but to Sean's point, or to the clerk's point, no person was brought in. So there's two sides. We've heard, haven't been around as long as Robbie, but I've heard presentations on exactly this and why they do it, so there's a policy decision there. But it's a good point about, you know, what the principals and teachers are seeing as well. So I don't know if it's if it'd be wise to invite in, you know, the minister or deputy or the person responsible for that policy, but also maybe the Teachers Federation on what they're hearing to see if their opinion on it has changed. So maybe I don't know what to have first, but those are the two immediate ones that come to my mind: the minister and whoever's responsible in the department. The expert is who I would like here, and then also the Teachers Federation, perhaps.
That's a great idea. Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Can I suggest that we bring in the Teachers Federation first to hear their thoughts on it, and then also the minister or deputy minister, whoever they feel is more appropriate, or both if they would like?
Yeah.
Would that be?
Does everyone agree with that? That we would maybe do it in two parts, PEITF first and then the minister? I think that's a really good idea, because in inviting principals in, I wouldn't want to put anyone in a position where they felt, you know, that they were in an awkward, I wouldn't want to put them in an awkward position. So PEITF, I think, is a really great, because I think it's important to hear the two perspectives for sure, because it is a systemic issue, and it would be nice to hear how people are dealing with it. Yeah.
Just for clarity, we treat that as a motion from Ms. Lund, and do we have consensus, or does anyone want a vote for that?
Do we want to vote on that, or do we all agree that we all agree? Yeah.
Consensus. Okay. Consensus.
Thank you for that. So, yeah, I guess that answers that question then, doesn't it? Okay, great. Any other new business before we move on? Okay. So it was, in our discussions, we thought it might be a good idea to have a quick discussion in camera on our recommendations to the Legislative Assembly that we started working on last week. Would that be the committee's wish to do that? Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Thank you. That brings this meeting to an end.
Oh, we need a motion.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry,
A
we need
motion to
from a
adjourn.
member. To go in camera, actually.
To go in
if we're-
camera.
If that's
Can I
what we're
get a
doing.
motion to go in camera? Lynn, so moved. And a motion to adjourn.
You're out of here.
No, we don't adjourn.
Thank you.